The same judge officiated, smiling as he looked between us. This time, we wrote our own vows. I spoke about choosing her, not because I had to, but because I wanted to stand beside her through storms and stillness. Claire spoke about partnership, about respect, about building something real instead of inheriting it. When I slipped the ring onto her finger, the world seemed to pause. This time, there was no deadline. Only intention. As the sun set, music played softly, laughter drifted across the fields, and for the first time in years, the farm felt like a place meant for joy, not just survival. Later that night, when the guests had gone and the lights dimmed, we sat together on the porch where everything had slowly begun. The field stretched out before us, steady and familiar. I thought back to that first day, the black SUV on the gravel road, the woman who came asking for a husband. She hadn't stayed because of a contract. She stayed because we chose each other. And that choice turned desperation into trust, trust into love, and love into a life we built, side by side. Not a deal. Not a necessity. But forever. The day she arrived at my farm, I was knee-deep in oil and rust, cursing an engine that hadn't worked right since before I finished high school. Sweat rolled down my spine, my shirt stuck to my back, and the only thing on my mind was whether the tractor would survive another season. Life was predictable that way, hard, repetitive, quiet. My name is Ethan Miller. I was 27, running my family farm alone outside Scotts Bluff, Nebraska. Just land, crops, cattle, and a sky so wide it made your problems feel small, until they weren't. 3 years earlier, my parents had been killed in a winter highway crash. Overnight, I inherited everything they'd built. Selling the land was never an option. This farm was more than property, it was memory, sweat, and legacy. Staying meant sacrifice, but leaving meant losing them all over again. That afternoon in late March was unusually hot, the kind of heat that carried dust in the air and made the fields shimmer. A country song hummed from the barn radio when I heard something out of place, tires crunching on gravel. No one came here without calling first. I wiped my hands and looked up as a black SUV rolled to a stop. It looked wrong against the dirt road, polished and expensive. The door opened, and a woman stepped out, her heels sinking into the soil as if the land itself rejected her. She was tall, sharp-looking, dressed for boardrooms, not barns. Her auburn hair was pulled back neatly, but her hands trembled as she adjusted her bag. Her eyes caught my attention. Focused. Exhausted. Like someone who hadn't slept in days because sleep wouldn't solve anything. Nearly a year passed before we spoke about that first courthouse wedding again. Not in legal terms. Not in strategy. But in memory. The anniversary arrived quietly, marked only by the changing color of the fields and the way the air cooled faster in the evenings. One night, after dinner, Claire and I sat on the porch watching the last light fade over the land. The farm was calm, steady, whole in a way it hadn't been for a long time. She broke the silence. I don't want our beginning to be defined by fear anymore, she said. I don't want a will or a board or a deadline to be the reason we're married. I knew what she was asking before she finished. I want to choose you, she continued. Out loud. In front of the people who matter. No contracts. No pressure. I didn't hesitate. We planned the ceremony right there on the farm. No luxury. No spotlight. Just open land, wildflowers, and strings of soft lights hanging from posts we hammered into the ground ourselves. Neighbors helped set up chairs. Friends brought food. It felt right, honest and grounded. The morning of the ceremony, the sky stretched endlessly blue. Claire wore a simple white dress that moved with the wind, nothing flashy, nothing forced. She looked freer than I had ever seen her. I wore clean boots and a jacket that still smelled faintly of hay. My hands shook more than they had in any boardroom or courtroom. Mornings became shared routines. She brewed coffee while I fed the cattle. Evenings found us on the porch, boots kicked off, watching the sky fade from blue to gold. Sometimes we talked about the future. Sometimes we didn't talk at all. The guest room stopped feeling like a guest room. Her suits began hanging beside my work shirts. Her heels rested near the door next to my boots. No conversation marked the change. It just happened, naturally, like the land accepting rain after a drought. We argued sometimes. About late-night calls interrupting dinner. About my stubborn refusal to ask for help. But those arguments ended in understanding, not distance. We learned how to meet in the middle. For the first time since my parents died, the house felt full again. Alive. And that's when Claire surprised me one evening, standing on the porch with a small smile and nervous eyes. "There's something I want to do," she said. Repeat button Ari Hook. She wasn't talking about the company, or the farm, but about rewriting the beginning of our story the right way. When the hearing ended, everything went quiet in a way that felt unnatural, like the calm after a tornado tears through a town. For weeks, our lives had been filled with lawyers, reporters, investigators, and the constant hum of fear. Then suddenly, there were no calls. No threats. No headlines breaking every hour. Ryan was arrested within days. His assets were frozen, his allies removed, his name quietly scrubbed from the company he once believed he owned. The Whitmore Group board stood firmly behind Claire now, not out of sympathy, but respect. She had survived the storm without flinching, and they knew it. We drove back to the farm late that night. The road stretched empty ahead of us, headlights cutting through the dark. Neither of us spoke for a long time. There was nothing left to defend, nothing left to prepare for. Only the weight of what we had just lived through. When we arrived, the farm looked different. The fields were still scarred from the fire, equipment half replaced, soil uneven, but it no longer felt fragile. It felt like something that had endured. Claire didn't rush back to Lincoln. She stayed. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She returned to work with a quiet intensity. The board gave her full authority, and she used it immediately. Predatory contracts were terminated. Deals that hurt independent farmers were reversed. Sustainability programs were funded. She didn't make speeches about it. She just did the work, methodically, relentlessly. And she never tried to pull me into her world unless I asked. Instead, she supported mine. Grants for improved irrigation came through. Fair supplier connections opened doors I never knew existed. But she never framed it as help. It was partnership. Always. At home, life began to settle into something steady. She turned toward me, not the board. "I married Ethan because I needed a legal shield," she said. "But I stayed because he treated me like an equal. Because he stood beside me when my name brought danger into his life. Because somewhere between the sabotage and the fire, I fell in love with him." The room went silent. Ryan laughed sharply. Convenient timing. That's when her lawyer spoke. "Before the board draws conclusions," he said, "we would like to submit additional evidence." The screen changed. Security footage appeared, grainy, time-stamped. A figure near my storage shed late at night. The angle shifted. Audio played. A voice spoke clearly. Ryan's voice. The color drained from his face. Then came the bank records. Bribes. Payoffs. Transfers linked directly to private investigators and contractors. A clear pattern of intimidation and sabotage. Ryan tried to speak, but the board chair cut him off. Moments later, uniformed officers entered his office. The hearing was suspended. An hour later, it resumed, with Ryan gone. The board's decision was unanimous. Claire Whitmore retained full control. The marriage was valid. The challenge was dismissed. When the call ended, Claire's knees buckled. I caught her before she fell, holding her as she shook, not from fear, but from release. We hadn't just survived. We had won. Together. Repeat button Ari Hook. But victory didn't bring peace right away, because once the cameras turned off, we had to face a much harder truth about what we become to each other. The morning of the hearing, the sky over Lincoln was steel gray, heavy with rain that never quite fell. Claire drove in silence, her hands steady on the wheel, but I could feel the tension radiating from her. This wasn't just a business meeting. This was Judgment Day. We entered the Whitmore Group headquarters through a side entrance, escorted straight to a private conference room. Lawyers filled the space, laptops open, voices low and urgent. Every document had been reviewed a dozen times, every timeline aligned, every detail checked for cracks Ryan could exploit. Still, none of that could guarantee the outcome. When the board session went live, Ryan appeared on the screen from another location. He looked relaxed, too relaxed. His tailored suit was flawless, his smile thin and confident, like a man already celebrating. He spoke first. "This marriage is a fabrication," he said smoothly. "A rushed arrangement designed to bypass my grandfather's will. Mr. Miller is a pawn, and Claire Whitmore manipulated the system to retain power." The words landed hard. Board members fired questions rapidly. Why the sudden marriage? Why no shared finances? Why no history? Each answer was factual, controlled, but I could feel the room leaning toward doubt. The truth was messy, and Ryan knew how to weaponize that. Then Claire stood. She didn't rush. She didn't raise her voice. "Yes," she said. "This marriage began out of necessity. I needed to protect my grandfather's legacy." Ryan smiled wider, sensing victory. "But," she continued, "what began as survival became something else." In interviews, she didn't hide behind legal language. She spoke about shared values. About respect for land. About partnership. Every time she spoke, she tied her name to mine, without hesitation. That's when Ryan escalated. The call came late at night. Claire answered it, and I watched the color drain from her face. "He's forcing a verification hearing," she said after hanging up. "Full audit. Board review. Everything." My chest tightened. "What happens if they rule against us?" She swallowed. "I lose the company immediately." "And you?" She hesitated. "You could be pulled into fraud investigations." We had 48 hours. Lawyers flooded the house. Documents piled up. Neighbors signed affidavits saying they'd seen us together. Photos from grocery runs. Shared schedules. Clean financial records. Everything laid bare. But none of it addressed the real question hanging in the air. That night, we sat on the porch. Fireflies flickered over the fields, the air heavy and warm. Claire finally spoke. "What if we lose?" I didn't think. I just told the truth. This stopped being a deal for me. I don't know when it happened, but it did. She turned to me slowly, eyes wide. Then she reached for my hand, not for show, not for strategy. And in that moment, pretending ended. Repeat button Ari Hook. The next morning, Ryan walked into the board hearing smiling, completely unaware that the evidence waiting inside would destroy him forever. After the fire, something inside the house shifted. Claire did not leave. There was no discussion about hotels, lawyers, or temporary arrangements. The next morning, she woke before dawn and was already in the kitchen when I came in from the barn. She had coffee brewing and paperwork spread across the table, her sleeves rolled up like she was preparing for a long fight. "I transferred the funds last night," she said calmly. "New equipment is already on the way. Everything is documented. No strings." I stared at her. "You don't have to do that." "I know," she replied. "That's why I am." From that point on, she stopped acting like a guest hiding from danger. She acted like someone protecting a home. She sat beside me during insurance calls, catching loopholes I never would have noticed. When adjusters tried to minimize the losses, she pushed back hard, her voice sharp but controlled. She never spoke over me, never treated me like a charity case. Every decision was made together. The press didn't slow down. If anything, they got worse. Articles painted our marriage as a transaction. They called me an opportunist, a nobody farmer clinging to a powerful name. I told myself I didn't care, but I did. Not because of my reputation, but because they were questioning something that had quietly become real to me. Claire noticed. One evening, she set her phone down and said, "You don't deserve this." I knew what I signed up for, I replied. She shook her head. No. You signed up to help me. You didn't sign up to be attacked. The next day, she went public. The first days were uncomfortable. I rose before sunrise. Claire slept later, starting her mornings with video calls and legal briefings. Her voice echoed through the house while I came in dusty and exhausted, grabbing food before heading back out. We coexisted. Barely. Then, on the third day, she showed up at the fence line holding a thermos. "Mind if I help?" she asked. She lasted longer than I expected. She asked questions. Listened. Laughed when she messed up. Burned eggs that night, and somehow turned it into a joke. That was the first real conversation we had. She told me about her grandfather. I told her about my parents. Something shifted. And that's when Ryan escalated. Repeat button Ari Hook. Because questioning our marriage wasn't enough, Ryan decided to attack the one thing I couldn't afford to lose. The headlines came first. Then investigators. Then whispers in town. Then one morning, I found my irrigation lines sliced open. Water flooded the fields, destroying young crops. Claire didn't hesitate. He's testing how far he can go. A week later, during a storm, I smelled smoke. The storage shed was already burning. We lost equipment. Seed reserves. Years of work. As I collapsed in the mud, Claire knelt beside me, shaking. "This is my fault," she whispered. "No," I said. "We face it together." And in that moment, the marriage stopped feeling temporary. Repeat button Ari Hook. But the fire wasn't the worst of it, because Ryan was preparing his final move. The drive into town felt unreal, like stepping into a parallel life that didn't belong to me. The sky was pale pink over empty roads. Claire drove, focused, quiet. We didn't talk much, not because of awkwardness, but because words felt useless. The courthouse was small. Brick walls. Faded flags. A place where lives quietly changed without applause. Her lawyer was already waiting. My neighbor Tom agreed to be a witness after I promised answers later. The ceremony took less than 10 minutes. No rings. No vows beyond the legal minimum. Just signatures, a handshake from the judge, and a sentence that changed everything. Congratulations. You are now legally married. As we walked out, Claire exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for weeks. By evening, her legal team had filed everything. The Whitmore board was notified. The will conditions were satisfied. On the drive back, she stared out the window. "Thank you," she said softly. "I won't forget this." "I just need honesty," I replied. She nodded. "You'll have it." That night, she returned to Lincoln to handle business. I barely slept, wondering if I'd just made the smartest or stupidest decision of my life. She came back the next morning with 2 suitcases, and bad news. "Ryan hired investigators," she said. "If this marriage looks fake, he'll challenge it. I need to stay here." I showed her the guest room, my parents' old bedroom. Opening that door felt heavier than signing any paper. Repeat button Ari Hook. Living under the same roof was never part of the plan, but it was only the beginning of what Ryan was about to do. The papers inside the folder weren't casual. Legal contracts. Estate clauses. Corporate filings. And a familiar name stamped across several pages. Whitmore Group. Even I knew it, one of the largest agricultural corporations in Nebraska. They owned land across the state, some of it bordering my own fields. Claire watched me closely as I flipped through the documents. My grandfather built the company, she said. His will requires me to be married to retain control. If not, it transfers to my cousin, Ryan Whitmore. That name made my jaw tighten. Ryan Whitmore had a reputation. Farmers pushed off land. Quiet settlements. Aggressive buyouts masked as partnerships. My parents had warned me about people like him. I handed the folder back. Why me? She hesitated. Your farm borders ours. I researched you. You're independent. No political ties. No corporate loyalties. And you can't be bought. That should have made me say no. My ex-fiancé left last week, she continued. I refused to sign deals that would crush small farms. Ryan would dismantle everything my grandfather stood for. The wind rattled the fence behind me as I tried to process it. So what are you actually asking? I said, a legal marriage. On paper. Tomorrow. Lawyers handle the rest. Once the board confirms compliance, we quietly annul. I shook my head. I won't lie for money. She stiffened. If I do this, I continued, there are rules. No pretending. No manipulation. If this turns real, it's because we choose it. For the first time, she looked surprised. Then she nodded. Deal. We shook hands beside the barn. Her palm was cool. Mine rough and oil-stained. That handshake didn't feel like a contract. It felt like the beginning of a storm. Repeat button Ari Hook. The next morning, I stood in a courthouse about to marry a woman I barely knew, while someone else was already plotting to tear us apart. She walked toward me carefully. Are you Ethan Miller? She asked. I nodded. That's me. She took a breath, glanced at the farm around us, then locked eyes with me. My name is Claire Whitmore, she said. I need a husband by tomorrow. The wrench slipped from my hand and hit the dirt. For a moment, I honestly thought I'd misheard her, or that this was some kind of prank. But her face didn't change. No smile. No hesitation. I'm sorry, I said slowly. You need what? Instead of explaining, she opened her bag and pulled out a thick folder, pressing it into my hands. If I'm not married by my 29th birthday, she said quietly, I lose everything. I didn't know it yet, but that sentence was the first crack in a life that was about to split wide open. Repeat button Ari Hook. I opened the folder, and realized the woman standing in my dirt driveway wasn't just desperate. She was dangerous to someone very powerful.